the mythology of the Indo-Europeans. Many of the languages on the Eurasian continent, including most of the languages of Europe, Persia and India, sprang from one source. This source is now called Proto-Indo-European, and it has been traced back to an area above the Caspian and Black Sea. Starting around 4000 BC, these people spread in waves over the Eurasian continent, taking their language with them. Studying the culture, beliefs and myths of these people is very hard, especially since they left us no writing. In this lecture, we'll discover how linguists have nevertheless managed to peer deep into the minds of these people, using only the words and stories that ended up in many far-removed Indo-European cultures. From this study, we know that they valued divinely inspired poets who memorialized the deeds of heroes in song in an attempt to give them everlasting glory. We even know the name of their main god, Dyaus Pitr, literally Sky Father, which became Dyaus Pitr in Sanskrit, India, and Zeus Pater in Greek, and Jupiter in Latin. Even Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, seems to be part of a widespread Proto-Indo-European tale, as we find a very similar story in India. Hey, good to see you. This is Stephan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence and enlightenment. We'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface-level understanding you get on other channels. Go check it out for yourself. Let's start. By reconstructing the vocabulary of Proto-Indo-European, shortened as PI, we can find out a lot about the lives of these people. We know that they clustered in households containing one or more families. And these families were further organized into clans, each led by a clan leader. A number of these clans would form a tribe, and each of these tribes was led by a ruler, or a harax, which became rex in Latin and raj in Sanskrit. Harax in turn was derived from harak, meaning to make straight, which became rectus in Latin and ruju in Sanskrit and right in English. These rulers possessed most of the wealth of the tribe, and since they were nomads, this meant that they possessed the most animals, their movable wealth as they called it. But since herd animals were in high demand in nomad society, they were often stolen. And this is reflected in a verb meaning to raid or steal cattle, which occurs in Celtic, Italian and in Sanskrit. So that was a verb that spread widely. As nomads often find themselves in the territory of other tribes, great emphasis was placed on the importance of the guest-host relationship. And both the word host and guest, by the way, derive from the PI root ghosties. It worked like this. Tribes would invite foreign allies into their communities and they would treat them well, hoping that that kind behavior would be reciprocated at a later moment. We see this relationship reflected in various Indo-European cultures, but especially in Greece, where the word moved in a few steps into xenia. There even was a theme in Greek mythology called theoxenia, where the hospitality of a human being was tested by a deity disguised as a poor man. And Zeus was believed to be a protector of strangers, for which he was called Zeus Xenios. So far we have learned about the social structure of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, but now we're going to peer into the minds of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, again using linguistics as our main tool. From the PI vocabulary we know that they deeply valued poetry, which they did not consider to be a secular art, but instead a divine calling. It was believed that the gods whispered the words of the poem to them. Calling to mind a poem was considered a magical act for which they used the PI root men, men became manjate in Sanskrit, which is related to the word mantra, and men became to mention in English. In Greece, bards often began their poems by asking the muses, also from that PIE root men, to help them call to mind the words of a poem. Associated with this is the word for honey or honey wine, madhu, which is also very widespread. It appears in Sanskrit as madhu, in Tocharian in Western China as mid, in Greece as methi, meaning wine, and in English finally as mead. And in Norse mythology, the mead of poetry was an important drink in their mythology that gave poetic inspiration. In the Rig Veda, the important foundational text of Hinduism, this honey wine was equated with soma, which became hauma in Avestan, a Persian language. And this was an intoxicating drink with the power to make its consumer feel immortal. Soma was also drunk by priests and offered in a sacred fire as food for the gods. The Celts in Western Europe also had bards. In fact, the word bard comes from the Celtic bardoi, and they sang songs about the brave deeds of warriors. This word bard goes all the way back to guerdo, which means praisemaker, which in turn was derived from guer, meaning to praise. And this word also ended up in Sanskrit and Indian as gur, meaning praise song, or gur, meaning to praise. And through the praise of these bards, heroes won fame and glory, allowing them to be remembered for generations. We also find this idea in Greece as kleos aftiton, and in India as sravas axitam, and both literally mean unfading glory, which was derived from the PIE root on the screen that I'm not even gonna attempt to pronounce. As we have seen, for the word glory or fame, the Proto-Indo-Europeans used kleos, which was derived from klu, meaning to hear about. To be famous means that other people have heard about you. And this word would later appear in Irish as klu, and all the way in Tocharian in Western China as kliu, a very widespread idea. In Greece, kleos became a central concept in the Iliad, the great Greek tragedy about the Trojan War. One of the main goals in this story of warriors such as Achilles was kleos, to be remembered by future generations through their heroic deeds. Now we'll use linguistics to derive some of the gods that the Proto-Indo-Europeans believed in. Their main god seems to have been a sky god. His name was related to Diu, meaning bright sky or the light of day, which in Latin became dies, in Sanskrit diva, and finally in English day. And the name for their sky god was Dyaus, which in Sanskrit became Dyaus, and in Greece it became Zeus. As the father of the gods, this sky god was known as Dyaus Pitr to the Proto-Indo-Europeans, or literally the sky father. And this became Dyaus Pitr in Sanskrit, Zeus Pater in Greek, and Jupiter in Latin, which was a shortened version of Dies Pitr, again sky father. A word related to Dyaus was Dyaus, which became a word for God. In Sanskrit it became Deva, in Avestan it became also Deva, in Latin it became Deus, and in Hittite in modern-day Turkey it became Zeus. Surprisingly, the Greek word theos, also meaning God, is unrelated to these words, but it instead goes back to desos, which is derived from de, meaning to do or to place. And by the way, the English word God is derived from gutos, referring to a liquid poured out as an offering to the gods. And this word, by the way, is also related to the Dutch word gieten, Dutch is my own language, and all the way in Sanskrit to hu, also meaning to pour a liquid. Now let's move to the other members of the family of the sky god. In many Indo-European cultures, the earth became personified as Mother Earth. In Proto-Indo-European, she was called Degom Meter, or Earth Mother, which we might see reflected in Demeter, the Greek goddess of the fertility of the earth, although this connection isn't completely solid. The Sky Father also had a daughter called the Sky Daughter, or daughter Dyaus, and she was the goddess of dawn, Jusos. In Sanskrit she was called Ushas, in Greek Eos, and in Latin she became Aurora, all derived from the Pi root Eus, meaning red glow, the red glow of dawn. The sky god also had divine twins, which in various cultures became associated with horse riding and the chariot, both likely invented by the Proto-Indo-Europeans. In the Rig Veda from India, these twins were called the Ashvins or the Nasatyas, and in Greece they were known as the Dioskoroi. And although these words aren't related, the stories are so similar that there must be a connection. In both cases, by the way, these gods were also known to rescue humans from danger. There also seems to have been a Proto-Indo-European sun god. As is common in many other cultures as well, the Indo-European sun god is often described as a surveyor of the world and is therefore associated with justice. And the disk of the sun is often described as being drawn by horses. We find this idea in Greece, in India, and also all the way in Scandinavia. Here, for instance, we see a beautiful sun chariot from 1400 BC from Denmark. And here we see an example from Greece from the 5th century BC. And here one from India. This is a relatively modern painting, but the idea goes way back, all the way back to the foundational text of Hinduism. There might even be a Pi root for Prometheus, the Greek god who stole fire from heaven and gave it to mankind. Because in Sanskrit, pramath, a bit similar to prometh of Prometheus, means to steal. And it was this verb that was used to describe a similar fire theft by the Indian divinity named Matarisvan. This Indian Prometheus is also closely related in the story to Manu, meaning man, who is the Indian Noah who survived a great flood and then repopulated the earth. In Greece, Prometheus was the father of Deucalion, who also became a survivor of the flood. And both of these characters also taught humanity how to sacrifice to the gods. So there are a lot of similarities here. There also was a mysterious figure called twin in various Indo-European languages. The Old Norse Ymir, for instance, was a primal human being who created the first humans according to their mythology. His name means twin, perhaps because he was able to create human beings by himself, without needing a partner. In Germanic mythology, we have Tuisto, also twin, who was the father of Manus, also related to the word man, who also became the ancestor of the Germans. And then there is the Sanskrit Yama and the Persian Yima, who was the god of death, but his name also means twin. And this Yama character was brother to Manu, that same Indian character who survived the flood and repopulated India. Clearly all these figures were all closely connected in one story in Pi mythology. And finally, some scholars even believed that Remus, one of the twins who founded Rome, was originally called Yimos, which also means twin. But again, the evidence for this is not conclusive as yet. There also seems to have been a Pi myth about a hero slaying a serpent, often with multiple heads. The Pi root that can be seen on the screen seems to mean he killed the serpent. And this line later also appeared in Avestan in Persian and in Sanskrit in India. And with a substituted verb it appeared in Greek, and with a substituted noun it appeared among the Hittites in modern-day Turkey. Finally, I want to mention some shared gods among the Indians, the Zoroastrians of Persia, and the Mitanni Empire, all the way in Syria. The earliest extant text in Persian is the Avesta, and the oldest part of this is called the Gathas, which was written somewhere, we're not sure, between 1500 and 600 BC, by the Persian prophet Zarathustra. According to later texts, Zarathustra sacrificed to the god Ahura Mazda, which he believed was necessary to create order in the universe. According to the young Avesta, this involved pouring the intoxicating drink hauma, called soma in Sanskrit, on the sacred fire. We mentioned this word before. In the Gathas, Zarathustra uses the word kawi to describe his competitors, which he identifies as false priests. And interestingly, this word appears as kavi in Sanskrit, but with positive connotation. It is possible that this changing meaning reflects an early conflict between the Indian and the Avestan clans. We see this reversal of terms also in the Avestan and Sanskrit words for gods and demons. For the Zoroastrians, their god was called Ahura, and their demons were called Deva, while in India the gods are called Deva, and the demons are called Asura. Quite shockingly, the young Avesta even explicitly names various important Indian gods, including Indra and the Nasatyas. But this text identifies them as demons instead. And then we move to the Mitanni Empire. In a treaty with the Hittites from Turkey from around 1380 BC, a Mitanni king explicitly names the Indian gods Indra, Varuna, Mithra and the Nasatyas. As you can imagine, it was quite a surprise to have these names turn up into a Syrian cuneiform document from so long ago. The Mitanni kings of Syria also took Sanskrit names. For instance, Tushrata is related to the Sanskrit for having an attacking chariot, and Artatama contains the word Urta, which became an important concept in India, meaning the cosmic order. And that is what we know about the mythology of the Indo-Europeans. If you want to know more about those Proto-Indo-Europeans or many other topics from world history, then read my book, In Search of the Sublime. You can read it for free on worldhistorybook.com, or you can buy the physical book on Amazon. See you next time. Bye bye.